Welcome, 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 everybody, back to another episode of DTLW Podcast live streaming on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and any other platforms out there. And we're happy to have with us today Dr. Danny Brassell. Danny is the co-founder of Well Crafted Story. He's a keynote speaker and a presentation skills coach, and I love that branch of what we do in leadership. And he helps people communicate effectively and acquire more clients through speaking. Danny, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Enrique. More importantly, thanks for spreading some joy around the world. We need a lot more of you, my friend.
Yes, well, I was just speaking not so long ago to somebody about that specific thing. We really do need more joy around the world. Thank you for noticing and commenting on that. Folks, we will be speaking about unlocking leadership influence through storytelling. Now, Danny, I know that this is one of those key things that most people leave out of their professional life, the ability to take something that happened or something they observed or something they even dreamed up sometimes and capture that in a way where it can influence their leadership or their ability to lead. But before we get into all that conversation, tell us a little bit about you and then we'll get into it.
Well, thanks, Enrique. If I was going to write an autobiography, it would probably be called Pivots because I feel like I've already lived 9 lives. 30 years ago, I was a journalist covering President Bush in the 1992 presidential election. I love my job. I got to meet every editor of every major daily. And one editor offered me the city beat for $16,500 a year. Meanwhile, a friend told me they were hiring teachers in South Central Los Angeles for $25,000 a year. So, Enrique, I became an educator for the noblest of reasons, for the high pay. And I actually, ironically, fell in love with teaching. I've taught all age levels from preschoolers all the way up to rocket scientists. I can make that claim because I used to teach English as a second language to engineering students at the University of Southern California. And in 2005, my wife and I attended a real estate seminar, which turned out to be a scam, and we lost everything financially. And I could give you the woe is me story, but I'm a positive person. I learned a lot from that experience. First of all, I learned that my wife is my soulmate. I put her through the ringer and she stood right by me. She's an incredible human being. Second of all, I learned that money's not everything because you can lose money just like that. Third, I try not to judge other people because if I was somebody who saw what I had done, I would have said, well, you deserve that. But now I realize unless you know everything about a person, you really don't know anything about a person. Fourth, I became a Christian, which I'm always embarrassed to confess. It took a catastrophe, but the more I read the Bible, I realize I'm not the first group to find Jesus. And fifth, I didn't want to file bankruptcy, and my accountant said, well, you have to earn this much more money then. And so I started speaking on the side, and I hit that number right on the number. Well, the next year, Enrique, he gave me a much higher number, and I hit that number right on the number. So in year three, I thought, well, maybe I should set a higher number. And basically, during one of the worst economic downturns in American history, I was able to build up a highly lucrative speaking business, which eventually attracted the attention of some pretty famous people and companies who asked me to coach them. And I have to completely confess, Enrique, I resisted coaching for a long time because you need to know this about me. I'm obsessive compulsive. I have a very high standard for my students. I will not let you fail. I will hold you accountable and be on your back until you succeed. Well, now that I work primarily with entrepreneurs and executives and business owners, I find that they're highly motivated. They do the work. It's probably been the most gratifying thing that I've ever done in my life. So that's a very long answer to your short question.
No, and I love that the history, the values, the short stories there. I would love to dig into that, but we got a slew of questions where we're focused to help the leaders that are listening on how to craft this thing called storytelling. But
Great.
love how that life cycle for you helped you end up getting where you are. And folks that are listening, you shared something, Danny, that was so powerful. Do not, right? Those that are listening, do not uh, take the temptation of judging somebody else's moment as if that was them forever, right? And and I fully agree, because I'm one that shared some similar things that you mentioned there. But when we're talking about storytelling, you just exercised what it is to encapsulate something in a short period, deliver it, and get somebody interested in, hey, I want to know more about that, right? So, as we had mentioned, we're speaking about unlocking leadership influence through storytelling. And you often talk about the transformative power of storytelling. How do you believe great leaders use stories not just to inform, but to inspire action and shape culture within their organization?
Well, of all people, Enrique, it was Joseph Stalin who said 1 million people dead is a statistic. 1 person dead is a tragedy. Translation, facts tell, but stories sell. Facts inform, but stories transform. And so I'll give your listeners a practical exercise I do with my clients. You can use this also, Enrique, later on. Get into a comfortable chair with a pen and paper, libation of choice. And for an hour, I want you to write down every story that's ever happened to you. And I don't mean the entire story, I just mean triggers, like the time I locked myself out of the car in front of Costco, the time dad spilled mustard on his tie when we went to that fancy restaurant. You'll find in an hour you can come up with hundreds of stories like this. So that's the first part of the exercise. The second part of the exercise is then I want you to think about, what's this story really about? Oh, this is a story about never giving up. Oh, this is a story about loyalty. Oh, this is a story about paying attention. If you were to look on my computer, I have hundreds of files with literally tens of thousands of stories. So when I'm putting together a presentation and I need my audience to have a certain emotion, I have a specific story to cause that emotion. That's the difference between a good presentation and an outstanding presentation. Good presenters, they tell stories. Great presenters, they tell stories with intention.
That is so powerful. The differentiator between the two, right? Somebody can just go ahead and gab, 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 and never get nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
And someone can, with a very strategic structure to a story like that. Oh, yeah, the time I dropped this on me, that was maybe embarrassment. Let's talk about embarrassment. Yeah, that is a huge plus for leaders that can do that, because we all have moments, right? And in your experience, what separates a good story from a leadership story that actually
Yeah.
moves people toward a vision or a mission?
I'll give you an example, Enrique. So I'm working with a woman right now. So just so you know, whenever I talk about my clients, I don't use their real names. You can talk to my co-founder. So I have 2 co-founders. I call us the professor, the performer, and the producer, because my background is in academia. My co-founder, Coach Jimmy Hayes Nelson, he's a former Broadway actor. And then my other co-founder, Dave Ward, is an attorney. So all of us bring different points of view. So when you're telling a story with intention, you do something like this. We're working with a woman, I'm going to call her Dr. Kathy. And Dr. Kathy is a nutritionist. She grew up with this intestinal disorder that doctors couldn't figure out what to do to help her. And so she was able to develop her own dietary system, which has really helped her health wise. And so she used to be a general nutritionist, but now she really helps women specifically with this problem. And a lot of people think they're counterintuitive. They think, well, that's really way too narrow of a niche. I'm like, well, that's where you're going to make your fortune, is that specific problem. You're a specialist now. And so she used to end her presentation on the call to action. And when we're working with our clients, we say there's 5 critical components to a presentation. Former teacher, you have to forgive me. Everything I do either rhymes or it's alliterative. We call it our 5 C's process. We talk about clarity, connecting with an audience, teaching meaningful content, having a clear call to action, and finally ending with an emotional close. And so Dr. Kathy, she was ending her presentation on her call to action. She said, well, I have a 90-day program for 1997. That was a big mistake. I said, well, there's 2 types of people in your audience. And so I'm going to generalize and stereotype. We'll say it's the husband and the wife. So the husband, He's the Joe Friday. He's the guy sitting there in the audience, and he wants just the facts. How much is this going to cost? What do I got to do? How long is it going to take me? And an effective, informative presentation will answer all of those questions for that person in your audience. But if you end your presentation on the call to action, you've ignored an incredible portion of your audience, significant portion of your audience, the what I call the wives, the Julia Roberts. The Julia Roberts, she doesn't care about all that information. She just wants to feel good. Gosh, I listen to Enrique's show because he always makes me feel good. It's like having my brother in the car with me when I'm driving to work. I love being around Enrique. And so the failure of Dr. Kathy's conversion was because she was ending with a call to action and ignoring a significant portion of her audience. And so I asked her, well, what do you want your audience to do? And she's like, I want them to buy my program. I'm like, yes, I know you want them to buy your program, but what do you want them to do? And we went back and forth like this for about 5 minutes. And finally she said, well, I want them to understand that they can't do this on their own. I'm like, oh, you need to hire an expert story. And she looked at me quizzically. She's like, what do you mean? I said, I'll give you an example. I'll leave you with this. Many years ago, my wife and I had theater tickets. We were dressed to the nines, driving to the theater. We got a flat tire. My wife said, well, I'll call AAA, get a tow truck. I'm like, you don't have to call AAA. I'm a man. I can fix a flat tire. So I got out of the car and I opened up the trunk and I got the spare tire and then I got the pumper thing and I got the big jack thing and started trying to take off the nuts off the tire. And basically 27 minutes later, I had grease all over me. I had not fixed the flat tire. My wife standing beside the car with her arms crossed, shaking her head like I could have done so much better than this guy. Well, unbeknownst to me, she called AAA 27 minutes earlier. This tow truck appears, and this 17-year-old punk hops out of the truck and in 3 minutes flat fixes my flat tire. You know, I think there are times in life when all of us think we can do it on our own. But if you want to save time, you want to save money, you want to save a whole lot of headache and embarrassment, you hire an expert. And so what I've done now is I've used a story as a metaphor to demonstrate to the audience, you know, I've tried lots of things in the past, but Dr. Kathy, she's an expert. Maybe I should just hire Dr. Kathy. It might actually work with Dr. Kathy. That's the power of an intentional story.
And that's very powerful because I think we all have had one way or another in all the things that we do, that we convince ourselves that we can do it, right? And that we have it what it takes. And potentially you may have it, but they already have it, right? The expert already has it, and they're ready to employ that. It's a great story. They're a great way to combine those two things. And for those listening, I'm sure you have plenty of those stories that you can combine to, and especially if you're an entrepreneur type person, to help you get those people to understand. Now, we have information overload everywhere. I mean, I cannot have my phone in my hand without a news flashing or, somebody saying, did you see that? And it's not like before we had to wait for a while to get the news story. It was used to be at 5 or 6, and then we would find out. Leaders have the same predicament. They're getting overloaded by information and they face information overload daily. So how can storytelling help them cut through the noise, communicate with clarity, and leave a lasting impact on their teams?
That's a great question, Enrique. And so I'll do a better job of explaining the 5 C's a little bit more thoroughly. So the first C is clarity. Before we put together your presentation, we have to have clarity. There are 2 questions I ask clients that if they can answer these questions succinctly, they'll be able to have an effective presentation. And you'd be amazed, 95% of the people we work with cannot answer one or both of these simple questions in a succinct manner. Those 2 questions are, who is your audience And what is the problem that you solve? A lot of people think, well, my audience is everybody. I'm like, well, if your audience is everybody, your audience is nobody. Dr. Kathy is a perfect example of a person who was able to narrow her focus. Now, she can expand her focus beyond just women with this intestinal problem. She can go to more general health conditions of women. That's fine. But you'll be amazed that if you get that very narrow person that get that narrow vision of the exact person that you're specifically serving, then you're going to have a more effective presentation. Then you have to think about, what's the problem that I solve? And really, one of the easiest ways to think of that is you want to think of the problem in the terms of the audience. Too many of us think it's about us. Donald Miller has a company called Story Brand. I love Donald, what he says. He says, when you're on stage, your job is to be the guide and make your audience into the hero. You're Ben Kenobi, your audience is Luke Skywalker. I completely agree with him on that. Too many people on stage are bragging all the time, and they're losing connection by doing that. And so that moves us into connection. Connecting in the first 5 minutes of your presentation, again, forgive me, I'm a former teacher, I say you always have to rap. So rap stands for, you have to show that you're relatable, you have to demonstrate your authority, and then you have to show the audience what your overall purpose is. And so relatability. Man, I am just like you. I've had the exact same problem that you've had. Authority. And I solved that problem. Purpose. And now I'm on a mission to help people just like you so that you don't have to suffer the way I suffered. If you can do that in the first 5 minutes of your presentation, you're going to connect with your audience. Brene Brown, she's a wonderful speaker. She talks about vulnerability, and I completely agree with her. There's one strategy I would share with your audience: is stop sharing your successes with your audience. Start sharing your failures, because not everybody in your audience has succeeded, but they've all failed. And the more you talk about your own failures, the more your audience is going to start to see themselves in you. And that's what you want to do, is to have them walk along with you on that journey. Now, the question that you've asked, Enrique, deals directly with the content portion of the presentation, which is the longest part of anybody's presentation. And ironically, it's the least important, because research, and I'm the academic, I like the research, research shows that the bun's more important than the burger. People remember the beginning of your talk and the end of your talk. They don't remember anything in between. But what they do remember is, are you helpful? And so I see people that they have a 12-point proprietary process, and they try to teach the audience all 12 points. We have a gentleman who's a venture capitalist. Well, he's trying to get venture capital in Silicon Valley for a technology company he created. And he talks about his unique 12-point AI system that he's created. And Coach Jimmy and I said, time out, you're teaching way too much. This is information overload. People remember things in threes. And so a simple rule of thumb is the rule of three. Don't try and teach more than three things at once, because just people can't remember that. And you see this demonstrated throughout history. Look at the Bible. There's three wise men. Look at nursery rhymes, Three Little Pigs, childhood games, rock, paper, scissors. Three is the maximum. But what you do want to do in the content portion of your presentation is demonstrate that you're helpful. When I began my career as a speaker, working with schools, and so one of my mentors was a wonderful gentleman. He's no longer with us, named Jim Trelease. And Jim, he used to teach parents how to read aloud to their children. And in the middle of his presentation, he'd always say, oh my gosh, I'm going to save your life one day. If you ever lock yourself out of your car, if you have your cell phone, call your significant other, have them put the cell phone next to the car key, and then you, wherever you are, take your cell phone and put it next to the car door, have them turn on the car door. It'll actually unlock the car door. Enrique, I've actually tried this from 3,000 miles away, and it works. It doesn't work with newer cars like Teslas or things like that, but I used to have a Toyota Corolla, and I locked myself out of the car. I was in Maine. My wife was in Los Angeles. It worked. Here's the point. This has nothing to do with his presentation, and I've seen this. Jim would have people come up to him. Oh my gosh, Jim, you spoke like 6 years ago. I remember what you said, and I locked myself out of the car, and oh my goodness, you saved my life. And I've been telling all the schools they should hire you. Has nothing to do with his presentation, but what he did, and which most people don't do, is he served his audience. He gave them something useful that worked, and they associated him with, oh, Jim solves problems. I mean, that's ultimately what a successful business person is doing, is they're solving problems. And not just this doesn't work just for business, by the way. It works for your personal life. If you're a parent, you're solving problems. All of us are solving problems, and so that's the content portion of the presentation. And then finally, we had talked a little bit about having a clear call to action, and then the close. But again, directly to the point that you were asking about with the content, people are trying to teach 28 different things, and you're just never going to have a coherent message that way. We work with politicians all the time, and we have to always focus them. Hey, if you look back at the 92 presidential election, James Carville and George Stephanopoulos were aides to then Governor Bill Clinton, and they just kept on pointing to a little chalkboard to him saying, it's the economy, stupid. Just talk about the economy. Every time you talk about the economy, stop talking about all these other issues. People want to hear about the economy. And, Bill Clinton became president of the United States by staying focused on one message. What I always tell people, again, former teacher, everything rhymes. So I would say choices confuse and cause you to lose. So you want to give people one clear call to action. This is a big mistake we see in a lot of presentations. You'll see it I was on a podcast yesterday, and the hostess at the end of the presentation, she said at the end of the podcast, she said, "I hope you enjoyed today's program. Make sure you like, subscribe, and give us a 5-star review." We got off the air, and I said, "You just asked your audience to do 3 things. They're not going to do any of them, because choices confuse and cause you to lose." The point I always bring up to people is, if you look at the top grocery stores around the United States, Publix and Kroger and Food Lion and Ralph's and Safeway, name it, none of them are the number one grocery store by volume. The number one grocery store in the United States by volume is Trader Joe's. And the reason is, when you go into your local big time supermarket to get mustard, there's 38 different types of mustard. When you go to Trader Joe's, there's one type of mustard. It's called mustard. They made the decision for you. It's very clear. This is what I do, because there's lots of research that shows that the more choices you give people, it just is that information overload you were talking about, Enrique, and people choose to do nothing. So make that decision for them. And then the final C of the 5C process is to have an emotional close, where you want your audience running to do business with you afterwards.
Yes, that's so true. And if anybody has had CPR, you know that when you go down and check the patient or the person in distress, you point at somebody and say, "You call 911."
Yeah.
Right? If you send them off with 2 or 3 things, that person's dead. So, and a lot of the situations in leadership, if you're overloading your people and you're wondering why things are falling by the wayside, it's because as much as you're overloaded with information, you're doing the same to them. And so, I'm not saying just get somebody to do one thing, but if you can get them close enough to one thing, that would be probably better. So
excellent demonstration of the point, Enrique. As a matter of fact, I'm going to liberate that from you. I'm not going to steal it, but I will liberate it. It's an excellent point.
Oh, thank you. Now, folks, when we are charged as leaders to share a story, and I'll ask you this, Danny, here in a second. There's a lot that we have to consider, right? So, Danny, what advice do you give leaders who struggle with vulnerability? Because you mentioned vulnerability, and it does take some of that to take some of your life, package it up, share it with a coworker that may be working for you, so that they can get it and understand, and then go forth and conquer. how can they use personal stories authentically without oversharing or losing authority?
That's a great question, Enrique, because a lot of people have been asking me about the oversharing thing lately. And this is why I think Coach Jimmy and I are a little bit different than a lot of the so called speaking coaches out there. Is a lot of people teach you to talk about the darkest moment of your life. And there's three reasons why I refuse to do that. First of all, the world just survived the global pandemic. Everybody's had a lot of bad stuff happen to them. I don't think we need more sad stories. I think we need more stories of hope. Second of all, what Coach Jimmy and I are teaching you to do is how to create what we call a well crafted story. Politicians would call this a stump speech. You can call it peanut butter and jelly, it doesn't matter what you call it. This is a presentation that you're going to deliver again and again, and it's going to make you so comfortable saying it because you've said it so many times that it's going to be ingrained into your brain like the Pledge of Allegiance or the Lord's Prayer. Well, do you really want to keep on talking about the worst moment of your life again and again? I have a friend, his daughter was killed in a school shooting. He's delivered that presentation over 1,000 times. I mean, I have no idea how he does that. You got to be stronger than me to talk about the worst moment of your life again and again. And third, this is where people get angry with me. I have one objective when I'm on stage. I want you to leave feeling better than when you came in. I want you smiling, happy, laughing. I think there's something admirable about that as a final objective. I believe that people tell the same sad story again and again. By the 20th time they're telling it, now those are crocodile tears and now they're being manipulative. And I'm not saying it's not an effective sales strategy. It's actually a very effective sales strategy. But I personally don't want to feel like I have to take a shower after I get off stage because I just manipulated my audience. There are ethical ways to get people to want to do business with you. And so on the oversharing bit, we're working with a gentleman right now. He's driving me crazy. A lot of people think they have to do all these extraordinary things. So this gentleman, he swam with sharks in Madagascar. He's climbed the highest peak on all 7 continents. He did the Iditarod in Alaska. I look at him like, nobody in your audience can relate to you. Nobody in your audience has climbed Mount Everest. You don't need those types of stories. The more powerful stories, and this addresses your point, Enrique, I like to find stories from your childhood because all of us did silly things as kids, but now that we're adults, we can be forgiven for all of those sins from our childhood because, well, we were just kids. Every single person peed their pants when they were in first grade. That's a vulnerable story, but it's not reflect unless you still, are peeing your pants, which I hope you're not. And if you are, I'm sure there's specialists that can help you in that. But that's the difference between oversharing. Oversharing, it's one thing to talk about peeing your pants. It's another thing about talking about peeing your pants yesterday. It's the time factor. And so that's why I especially love childhood stories because you can be a goofball, you can make horrible mistakes, and people are going to forgive you because it was from your childhood. That's not oversharing. Oversharing is something that's happened recently that's still, you can still feel the pain a little bit.
Yes, I agree there. Now, you helped me recall a situation that I was in when I was advising for a CEO. There was a young man that they had charged me to help. They were just habitually late. And I remember he asked why I was trying to help him. And I said, because I was you.
Mm,
I was you many years ago. I was not this punctual 15-minute prior kind of guy. I was the guy struggling to even make it there late. And
yeah.
so once I shared that story with him, I went from executive in the C-suite to his co-laborer.
Mm-hmm.
And chopping off that layer of I would say of hierarchy allowed him to believe that if I could do it, so can he.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the story didn't end in a positive note, but because he just could not escape the hurdle of the time challenge. But years later, I get a message on LinkedIn. And he says, till today, you are still the most influential leader I have ever met.
Wow.
And so I was like, whoa. All I did was let him know that I wasn't always as polished as I look today,
Mm-hmm.
and that there's a chance for him. And so you brought that story up as you was talking, because there is a moment in vulnerability for the leaders listening where you can grab some of those challenges. You don't have to expound on them and bring them all out. Just use them for what it's needed at the time, right? And so
Right.
thank you for sharing that, Danny. I appreciate that. Now,
Thank you.
you mentioned well-crafted story. Well-crafted story focuses on elevating voices. What is one practical storytelling framework leaders can start using today to communicate their values, expectations, vision, and more effectively?
Yeah. So again, I believe storytelling is the way to do that, and it's the simple stories. I like just finding small bits that I can create a humorous analogy to. So I'll give you an example. Here's one I use. I say, when I was an elementary school teacher, every other teacher at the school went through hundreds, if not thousands, of band-aids every single school year. I mean, kids love band-aids. They work better than smokes on the prison yard. Well, every year I went through exactly one band-aid in my classroom, and my colleagues always asked, well, what's your secret? Well, on the first day of school, I always have a chubby little boy. We'll call him Paco. And Paco's picking at a scab all morning long. And finally, after recess, he has success. He starts bleeding. And the annoying little girl next to him raises her hand, rubs her nose, and says, Mr. Brassell, Paco's bleeding. I rush over to Paco. I'm like, oh my gosh, Paco, you know what you need? You need a Band-Aid. Now, 33 little heads look my way. I'm like, I have a drawer full of Band-Aids in my desk. And I don't just have ordinary Band-Aids. I got Mighty Morphin Power Ranger Band-Aids. And I'm going to give you the Green Ranger because he's the coolest. Now, Paco's smiling. All the kids are grinning from ear to ear. I walk Paco to my desk. I open up the drawer. I say, oh, before I put on the Band-Aid, we got to clean out the wound. So I show all the kids a bottle of rubbing alcohol. I say, hey, Paco, hold on to my hand. This might sting a little bit. I start pouring on the rubbing alcohol. He starts screaming bloody murder. Ah! Put on the Band-Aid. My head. Hey, anybody else need a Band-Aid? My students can have a skull fracture, and they will never ask me for a Band-Aid. Ladies and gentlemen, today I'm not going to give you Band-Aids. I'm going to give you practical strategies on how you can create your own well-crafted story. So what I've done is I've just taken an inane story about a daily occurrence, something that's humorous, that's going to get people to laugh, but I'm also getting them into the point. This is how you use stories to make your points. Another story I tell, I say, the stupidest thing I ever said as a teacher was when I was teaching first grade. I looked at my little ones and said, all right, kids, write about your lives. And they looked at me like I was from outer space. Like, we're only 6. Nothing's happened to us. I'm like, no, man, things happen to you all the time. I'm like, when I was in first grade, I had a teacher. She called me stupid, smacked me on the hand, got me to cry in front of the class. Well, the next day I was walking to school. I had an apple. So I peed on the apple. I gave her the apple. She ate it and said it was the best apple she had ever had. My students look at me and say, that is awesome. This is also the reason I've never accepted food from a child. But if you want people to give you stories, you got to give them stories. So again, this is how you're using stories to make points. Again, I prefer to use humor. Humor of all movies, it was one of my favorite movies was Monsters Inc. They talk about it that laughter is actually more powerful than tears, and I'm a big believer in that. I think the world needs a lot more laughter.
Yeah, that indeed was so funny. So I could just imagine that teacher grabbing that apple. If that was the best apple, I don't know what apple she's been eating, but but it's so true. You can capture these moments that are comical. Everybody enjoys a laugh, a chuckle, especially you're doing a presentation or you're speaking to a group. You have to interject those funny moments because they kind of break down the guys, that are like this, give me my points and I can leave. from those that are truly enjoying themselves there. Now, earlier we were talking. You mentioned data. You mentioned metrics, and many leaders, they rely heavily on data and metrics. How is this storytelling thing going to help me? I need to see the point on a graph. What increase in revenue am I going to get? All this other things. So how do you coach them to balance facts with narrative so their communication feels both credible and compelling?
I think there's two components to that question, Enrique. So first of all, how do you effectively evaluate your presentation? So if people say you are a great speaker, that's wonderful, and if they give you a standing ovation, bravo. But the only way we measure your effectiveness as a presenter is how many people in your audience are choosing to take the next step with you. Now, that next step can be an unpaid next step, like subscribe to my podcast or vote for me. More likely, it's a paid next step, like buy my product or invest in my coaching program. We want to actually look at your numbers. A lot of people don't know their numbers, and to me, it's very important to know your numbers. So we're working with a financial planner by the name of Richard, and Richard, the way he used to start off his presentation. Here's what Richard does: is the way he gets clients is twice a week. He does these presentations for about 15 couples in their 50s or 60s that are planning on retiring. He does a 1 hour presentation at a fancy steakhouse, and they get a free steak dinner. And so he's hoping that those people, the call to action is to schedule a free consultation appointment at his office after that presentation. And so he has typically about 15 couples at these presentations. And he used to get, out of the 15 couples, about 6 of them were booking that appointment. And so the way he used to start his presentation, he's like a lot of people. He's like, "Oh, my name is Richard. I've been in the industry for 30 years. I've made over $1 billion for my clients. I work with this famous person and this famous person." I said, "Time out, Richard. What are the 3 most important elements of real estate? Location, location, location. It's all right to brag, but you're doing it in the wrong part of your presentation." And so what we did is we changed his opening stories. Now Richard tells this story about the very first client he got in the financial industry like 30 years ago. And it's this comedy of errors. He made so many mistakes. I have no idea why this person invested their money with him. And he noticed it right away. He said that Joe Friday in the audience, the guy usually is like this at the beginning of his talk. Now that he's changed the story, the guy is patting his knee because he's laughing so hard. And after just the first time, he noticed immediately, out of the 15 couples, 12 of them booked that consultation. So he actually doubled his effectiveness as a speaker. So that's the first part of your question, is the effectiveness of your presentation. We're looking at the numbers, how many people are choosing to take that next step with you. I think more the gist of your question is, how do you use numbers in a presentation? And again, you don't want information overload. I see this mistake all the time. People are having you do math, giving you all kinds of statistics. And the most effective leaders, they don't use statistics. They use stories. Actually, Steve Jobs, one of my favorite speakers of all time, he was really effective with this. If you read, and this is why I read, people are like, "Danny, why do you read so much?" I'm like, well, there's plenty of readers that don't necessarily become effective leaders, but I can't name a single effective leader in history that's not also an avid reader. The reason people are reading is they're getting these stories all the time. Stories prove points. When I read the wonderful Walter Isaacson biography on Steve Jobs used to do this to motivate his employees. When he was creating the Mac, it was taking like 4 or 5 seconds to turn on the Mac. He's like, 4 or 5, we need to make it so when they turn it on, it only takes 2.5 seconds. I don't remember the exact numbers, which is an important point. People don't remember the exact numbers. They remember the point. He's like, hey, if we can cut a second off and we have 100 million users, that's the equivalent of 345 lives. You're saving lives. I mean, he got people like, oh my gosh, I'm saving lives if I can do this. That's how he used his numbers. Is the math was, wait a sec, we can have a huge effect if we do this. That's what an effective presenter is doing with their math. They might be using numbers and statistics, but if you watch the movie, By the way, whenever I use politicians as an example, I'm not talking about the politics because people freak out. I'm like, no, I'm just using it for the presentation style. But the movie An Inconvenient Truth with former Vice President Al Gore, he's giving a lot of environmental facts. And rather than bombarding you with lots of numbers, he's giving you visuals to demonstrate the point. And so I still remember this. It just came to the top of my head was he was talking about climate change, and he shows pictures of Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa, and it has like no snow anymore. And he's like, see, there's not even snow on this. There's no Ernest Hemingway couldn't write The Snows of Kilimanjaro because there's no such thing anymore. And that's a visual, and that's if you watch, Walt Disney said people think in pictures, and this is an important point for all the leaders in your audience. This is what a story is doing. It's painting pictures. People think in pictures, and I can prove this. Enrique, I'll do this with you. I've done this with thousands of people. I'm going to give you 5 seconds, Enrique, and I want you to think of an apple. So I'm going to start my timer now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Enrique, tell me what kind of apple you just thought of.
I saw a sweet red, shiny apple.
Great. Sweet, red, shiny apple. Excellent. And people describe different types of apples. Some people would have thought, oh, I thought of a Granny Smith green apple. Some people thought of a Fuji apple. Some people get even more creative. Like, oh, I thought of my Apple iPhone or an Apple laptop. In all my time doing this exercise, Enrique, I've never had a person say, oh, I thought of APPLE, the letters that spell apple. Nobody's ever thought of that because we don't think in words. We think in pictures. And a good storyteller is making points with pictures. That's why when you're watching the news, and now I'm going to show you that I don't even watch the news anymore because I'm going to use Peter Jennings as an example. It's about the last time I watched the news. But when Peter Jennings is talking about the war in Iraq, if you look in the upper right-hand corner, there's a picture of like an explosion. It's not this list of 18 bullet points, which is one of the first things I point out to people when they're using PowerPoint. I'm like, PowerPoint is supposed to create pictures. You can actually, the Bible is a perfect example of this. I look at Jesus, I always laugh whenever I'm reading the Bible because Jesus is the most frustrated teacher in the world. He's telling the apostles things they're not getting. He's like, okay, let me tell you a story. And that's how he gets his points across, his storytelling. Look at this. I would bet 9 out of 10 non-Christians are familiar with the story of the prodigal son. They're familiar with the story of the Good Samaritan. They're familiar with the story of David and Goliath. But I also bet you 9 out of 10 Christians cannot tell you the 10 Commandments because it wasn't presented as a story. It was presented as a PowerPoint with 10 bullet points on the slide. People don't remember numbers, they remember stories. And so this is the long-winded answer to your question, Enrique. How do you use numbers effectively? You don't. You try to, you take that number and you make it a visual. I remember reading the book in retrospect by Bob McNamara, the Secretary of Defense under President Kennedy and President Johnson. And that's what he would be talking about with the Vietnam bombings and stuff. He would say, "Oh, we bombed. It was the equivalent of the population of Long Beach, California." I was like, "Whoa, that's actually making it hit home a lot harder." So that's what I would encourage all leaders to do: is if you're going to use those numbers, those statistics, you still want to create a visualization, a story for your audience to cling on to, so that they can remember it more than 24 hours after you've made the presentation.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, that's one of the challenges that leaders have, that, trying to get a way to communicate these things uh, seems challenging. And communication is challenging as it is if you don't hone it right and know how to employ words or the storyline and things like that. Now, I know you've worked with leaders across industries. But what recurring communication mistake do you see most often, and how can storytelling help them correct it?
Well, most of the people, Enrique, I work with, they're not trying to become professional speakers. they're trying to grow their business through speaking, or their whatever their business platform or their political platform through speaking. A lot of them are terrified of speaking. And you need to know this, is that speaking is a skill. It can be taught. You can get better at this, and you're in good company. People don't know that Barbara Streisand, she vomits before she goes on stage for any of her musical performances. President Reagan used to vomit before almost every single speech he ever gave. Bill Russell, center for the Boston Celtics, Red Auerbach used to get irritated with him. He's like, "Come on, Bill, vomit so we can start the game," because he was so nervous all the time. So you're in good company, but it's the reps. You get more comfortable. I'll give you an example. I'm teaching my youngest daughter how to drive right now, and she's so cute. When she gets in the car, she's adjusting her mirrors. She's putting her hands at the 10 o'clock and the 2 o'clock position, Enrique, you and I know that a year from now, she'll be driving with one hand, she'll be eating a Big Mac and putting on lipstick and things like that, because she'll be so used to it. It's become automatic to her. There's automaticity. And that's what we're trying to do with people in their presentations, to make them feel more comfortable. In terms of other things that I see people doing on speeches, people often hire me for humor, and because I like adding humor to presentations. But humor doesn't mean telling jokes. You're not trying to be a stand-up comedian. If you are going to add humor into your presentation, to me, the easiest approach is to just make fun of yourself. I don't like people that make fun of other people. I like people that make fun of themselves. If you watch, there's two ways to really get better at speaking, Enrique. The first way is to watch lots of speakers. I mean, I watch 10 speakers a day. I watch politicians. I watch televangelists. I watch comedians. I watch them in front of big groups, in front of small groups, in front of men, in front of women. Here's a ninja strategy for your audience, Enrique. I watch a lot of televised award shows, because when the person wins the Academy Award, they only have 45 seconds to connect with their audience. I want to see how they use their 45 seconds. Most people waste their time. They get up there, they're like, "I want to thank God. I want to thank the Academy." It's stupid. Nobody's paying attention. But every now and then, a person does an incredible job. So a few years ago, there was a gentleman by the name of Joe Walker who won the Academy Award for Best Film Editing. Now, this is Hollywood. The important people are in the front of the room, the actors. And the camera's scanning the crowd. You can see nobody's paying attention. This is film editing. And Joe Walker, he gets up on stage. He's British. He speaks very slowly and deliberately. He says, "A lot of people don't know this, but when phrased properly, the term Academy Award nominee can be used as an insult." Well, now the camera's scanning the audience. You see people leaning in like, what's he talking about? He says, "For example, yesterday I got in an argument with my 17-year-old daughter, and she said, 'Well, Academy Award nominee Joe Walker.'" All of a sudden, you see everybody laughing hysterically. He gets off stage. Denzel Washington wants to meet him. Sandra Bullock wants to meet him. Brad Pitt wants to meet him. Time magazine said it was one of the highlights of the Academy Awards. Well done, Joe Walker. The first way you get better at speaking is you watch a lot of speakers. The second way you get better at speaking, I've been blessed with lots of coaches throughout my career. One of my coaches was a guy named Jim Rohn, and Jim used to say, "You can't pay other people to do your push-ups." Translation, you got to do the work. I mean, you got to practice. You got to get comfortable out there. The way you get comfortable is through reps. I mean, even the smallest towns in America have a Rotary Club, a Lions Club, an Optimist Club, a Kiwanis Club. They got schools, they got churches, synagogues, temples, chambers of commerce. Get out there, speak, go on podcasts. Nothing bad. People think. I had a woman a couple of weeks ago. She said, "Oh, you're such a great speaker. The way you were so quick at answering my question." I'm like, "What you don't understand is I've been asked that question 500 times before. So before you asked it, I had 500 opportunities to craft the perfect, brilliant response that you just heard from me." I like to watch comedians a lot, because comedians are really good with the humor. Watch what they do. You watch Kevin Hart is a short black guy. So he tells a lot of jokes about being a short black guy. Jim Gaffigan's a big fat white guy. So he tells a lot of jokes about being a big fat white guy. What they've done is brilliant. They've taken their perceived weakness and they've turned it into a strength. I didn't work with either President Biden or President Trump on their presidential campaign, but if I had, I would have given them probably contrary advice to what a lot of people would have said. President Biden, I would have encouraged him to make jokes about his age. I can't remember anything. I'm too old to remember anything. By making age a joke, he's now taken it away as an issue. If I was advising President Trump, I'd say make fun of your humility. Nobody is humbler than me. I'm the most humble person in the world. Like what you're taking is your perceived weakness, and by making fun of it, now the audience is laughing with you, and they're like, oh. Coach Jimmy uses example the movie 8 Mile. At the end of 8 Mile, I'm going to establish my whiteness right now. Eminem gets in like a rap off with this black guy, and Eminem's friends are like, "Oh man, he's going to diss you. He's going to say that your mom's a cracko and you live in a trailer, and he had sex with your girl." And so Eminem, he gets there, he has to go on first, and he looks at the guys like, "You gonna say that I live in a trailer, that my mom's a cracko, that you've been with my girl?" All of a sudden, the black guy, he doesn't know what to say. Like, whoa, you just took away all my ammunition. Oh, there's a lesson in that.
A great big old lesson in that one. I tell you that as leaders, entrepreneurs, those that are business owners, crafting these stories seems like an arduous thing. But as you have well explained throughout this almost hour that we've been together, it's those personal things that we can glean from. They're already our stories. You don't have to make them up. It happened. How do you craft it? How do you get it in a way or put it in a way where the listener will come out of there with an aha and a remember? Remember you mentioned that speaker, about the phone, right? They instantly took away something that they could actually use, and they will forever remember him, right? So those are the things that are vital and are readily accessible to us, and we just have to remember that. Now, part of leadership, part of being business owners is the fact that things change, right? Things change sometimes in instants. But one of the things that change in companies, in our organizations, is that sometimes we have to, uh, spread some news that may not be as beneficial to all of the team. And so when organizations are going through change or uncertainty, what types of stories are most effective for calming fears, building trust, and rallying teams around the future, although it may not be so, good?
Yeah, so General Eric Shinseki was first four-star Asian American Army general, member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he has a quote I always loved. He said, "If you don't like change, you're going to like your relevance even less. Change is always going to happen." And so, what you want to do is you want to find. Again, this is why I believe in personal stories. Personal stories talk about those moments, especially from your childhood. These are a little bit more precious, and it's far enough removed you're not going to be judged on it. But find those childhood stories and talk about moments, because before anybody's an expert, they're always an amateur. I guarantee you, every kindergartner freaks out about going into first grade. Every Division I star athlete has a fear when they hit that professional arena for the first time. Even whoever becomes president of the United States, their first day in the Oval Office, they don't feel like they belong there. So you have to understand that everybody goes through change. And I'm working with a gentleman right now. He's being so difficult. He's like, "Danny, I have no stories." Like, everybody has stories, and he was being so difficult. Okay, if you're going to be difficult, this is the point I made to him. One of the most popular personal development books of all time is Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, in which he shares no personal stories whatsoever. What he did is he interviewed all kinds of millionaires and shares their stories. And so, at the very least, if you're going to be so tough on yourself that you have no stories, this is why you should be reading all the time. You should be finding out stories, magnificent stories about other people all the time. I mean, I read a book recently. The book stunk, But there was one story in the book that was worth reading the entire book, which is all I ever look for in any book. Is there at least one story? It was a marketing book, and it was about this gentleman going around the world trying to figure out the next big thing to market. He couldn't find anything. He's stuck in Chile. He's watching these fishermen, and they're fishing, and he notices they're putting all their catch in one basket, and then they're taking out certain fish and putting it in another basket. And he notices they're eating that fish. He says, "Oh, are you eating that fish because you're getting paid for the main catch?" And they're like, "Well, yeah, but also this is a tastier fish." He asks him, "Well, may I try it?" I'm like, "Sure." So he tries it. "Oh my gosh, this is delicious. What's it called?" I'm like, "Oh, it's called the bonefish." The bonefish? That's the worst name I've ever heard. He thinks about it. He introduces the fish into the United States. It's now the #1 selling fish at fancy dining establishments in the United States. He changed the name bonefish to Chilean sea bass. That's a lovely story. I love that story. And so for the people that are talking about those stories of change, I mean, heck, AI's here. All you have to do is type in AI, give me some stories about change. It'll give you a whole bunch of stories right there. If you can't think of anything on the top of your head. But I would really still encourage you, what you really want are those personal stories. They're going to connect a lot better with the audience. But if you can't do that, find somebody else's story to connect with.
Absolutely. Now, that's great advice there. And I hope those that are listening are looking already deep into the, the recesses of your mind where you can pull out some of these things throughout the rest of your career or your life and share those that will generate some interest in both you and in your leadership. I was talking about using stories for influence, and you can, and Danny has well spread out all the information that you could ever have for you to do so. Now, Danny, thank you for joining me today. If the listener, the viewer, wanted to get a hold of you, your services, or wanted more of what you provide, where would they go? Where do you want them to go visit?
Well, as a thank you to you, Enrique, and your audience for having to listen to my stories, I wanted to give everybody a freebie. So if you go to freestoryguide.com, guide like a tour guide, freestoryguide.com, we're going to give you your own free well-crafted story blueprint. What this is the exact process that Coach Jimmy and I take our clients through so you can create your well-crafted story. What this does for you is it takes the guesswork out of where do I put this story and why am I putting it here? And what this means for you is now you have an actual system to convert your audiences into actual clients. You can get that at freestoryguide.com. And Enrique, I just want to thank you for having me on your podcast today. I just think you're doing a whole lot of good. And people out there, I don't know who you think you are, but all of you are leaders. At the very minimum, you're leading yourself.
Absolutely. And thank you once again, Danny, for sharing that. Folks, get your guide. This is going to help you curate, create, and deliver a good, compelling story for you to continue to enlarge your influence as leaders and as business owners. So thank you again, Danny, for that. And folks out there, please subscribe to the channel. It will help us greatly to get this content to someone else. Thank you all for being with us, and we will see you at the next DTLW Podcast Live. Be blessed.